for joining us. My name is Chris and I'm a tutor at St. Padarn's. My job title is CMD, or Continuing Ministerial Development Tutor, to give it its full title. Our webinar this afternoon is the first of a series offered by St. Padarn's on digital or online ministry, and that's going to run over the next few weeks. And through this series, we're going to reflect on some of the changes that the current pandemic has brought, the way that we exercise our mission and ministry in a wide variety of different contexts. We'll also share experiences from churches right across the province and offer some very practical advice about the way in which we do things, or we might aspire to do things in the future. Each webinar will look at a different aspect of digital ministry, and you can find details of them along with a link to book yourself in on the St. Padarn's website. And you should find a link to that posted to the chat box as I speak. It's just coming up there. Now, in a moment, I'll introduce our speaker for today, which is Bob Jackson, but one of the practical things before that, just about the format of the webinar to help it to run as smoothly as possible. Now, Bob's initial presentation will last for about 25 minutes, and after that, we're going to set some time aside for some questions and answers and possibly some further discussion as well. So we're hoping to keep the format quite fluid today, but however it pans out, we promise that our cut-off time will be 3:15. And there may well be questions that arise from Bob's presentation, and you can submit those via the Q&A function that you'll find at the bottom of your screen. My colleagues, Veronica and Jen, are working quite hard in the background today, and they'll monitor those questions as we go along, and it's those that will form our Q&As at the end of our webinar. If we have a few questions broadly asking the same kind of thing, we'll probably bunch those together and just use one of them. So please don't be offended if you find that your particular question is dismissed for any reason. It just means that we've already received one that's very similar. If you prefer to ask a question anonymously, then you need to enable the anonymity feature before you pose your question, and then when it comes up, your name won't come up with it. Don't worry if you missed something today, or if you want to hear this webinar back again, as it's being recorded, and you can revisit it at any time via the Ministerial Hub on the St. Padarn's website. And finally, you'll automatically receive a feedback request via email tomorrow. I would ask that you complete that if you can. It's short, very straightforward. But with these webinars, we're very much learning as we go along, so it would be really useful to know if we've got it right or where we can do things better. So that's more than enough for me for now. We're going to kick off our series really with somebody that needs no introduction. Bob Jackson, as many of you know, has worked extensively in the church in Wales and the Church of England over many, many years. And his reports entitled Everybody Welcome Online and Everybody Welcome to the Future have become touchstones for many of us over recent weeks and months as we've looked to reimagine ministry and explore how we can make the most of opportunities presented by online and digital ministry. So more than enough from me. I'll be back to facilitate some questions and answers later, but I'll hand over to Bob.
Right, thank you, Chris. Hello, everybody. It's great to be with you, and I hope you can hear me okay. I'm actually retired, you know, I passed 70 last year, and I thought I'll retire from doing church growth stuff. Still running a sort of fresh expression of church in our own village of Eam in North Derbyshire. But of course, this whole online business has brought me out of retirement because it seems so interesting and so important. I think the business of going online in churches at the same sort of level of importance as the invention of printing and the first Bible in the vernacular, the prayer book, you know, the Roman roads that enabled the gospel to get around. This is right up there. This is a critical moment for the churches of the world, and so we want to pray and get it right and see where God's leading us. So I came out of retirement to have a go at this, and I've been really enjoying it and enjoy meeting you today. What I'd like to do is take some bits from the two reports and a few other things, and I'll just say something under 4 headings, and then we can have a conversation. First heading, we've conducted a survey of churches in small groups where we get 100% response rate from a small group, so that we're surveying churches that aren't online and are not doing great online, as well as the enthusiasts, and find out what's happening on average across the country. Got 176 churches in so far. They're all from England. So I quite like some from Wales. If anyone would like to volunteer to be an agent for me and find a little group of churches, a deanery or churches together group, and conduct the survey, that'd be brilliant. Be in touch with me. So this is what we've learned so far from 176 churches. And there's a survey questionnaire which you find, I think, in Everybody Welcome online. Just give you 8 quick answers. This is the first thing I'll do. I'll go on to do 3 other things after this. What have we learned? First of all, we've learned that about 85% of the churches have gone online for church services, which I think is an extraordinary achievement. It's not that every single individual small church is online, but every benefice is online, or 85% are. So if you've got a benefice of 6, very likely you're doing 1 online service for all 6. In ours, we're doing rather more than that, but I count all 6 in on that. So 85%, that's extraordinary, because this all took most of us by surprise, and we've all been on a steep learning curve. That's number 1. Number 2, we found, though, that about 30% of churchgoers have not transferred online with their church, either because the church hasn't gone online, or because they haven't got the gear, or because they could do it, but they don't want to. And 30% is a lot to lose. So obviously, I think you and many other people have been exercised. What do we do with the 30% who haven't come online with us? And there's been various responses to that, including using telephone links and all sorts of other stuff. But we've also found that proportion that don't go online varies enormously between different areas and churches. So some churches, everybody has gone online, no problem. Other churches tell me only 20% have gone online, the other 80 haven't. So it varies gigantically. And that's one of the features of what's happened to us, all shot all the way through, that responses have been very varied. It's varied in this case by the age of the congregation and by the socioeconomic characteristics. So if you're a poor area with an elderly congregation, probably quite a high proportion of the people won't follow you online. If it's a younger congregation in a more prosperous area, probably most have. I don't know what your experience is, but we've found everything. So that's number 2. Number 3, this is the real stunner, that those 176 churches told me that their average weekly attendance before lockdown totaled about 10,200 people. But using some fairly conservative assumptions, I've been translating the metrics of peak views, peak devices and subsequent views, those sorts of metrics from Facebook and YouTube and Zoom, into estimates of the numbers of people accessing online services. And the estimate I've made, the sort of central estimate, is that there's currently, for those churches, there's about 15,500 people accessing their services online. So that's a growth of over 50%. You start with 100, you lose 30, and then you gain 80 to get to an increase of 50%. And that's quite extraordinary. I've lived my life, as you have, most of it, not in the 1950s and early 60s, but since then, I've lived my life with ever slowly declining numbers of attendees at church, and suddenly it goes up by 50%. So that rather caught my attention, to be honest, and I hope it does yours. Now, part of the explanation is the unravelling of part of the explanation of why attendance trends have been downwards in the past. People have been coming more often. because it's back to the 1950s. Friends, there's been nothing else to do on a Sunday. We've been locked down. I tell you, if you're old enough to remember the 1950s like me, you might remember that you were pretty locked down on a Sunday in the 1950s. There was nothing else to do, so you might as well go to church, and if you did, you go every week. So some of it is that, more frequency, and also there's been a surge in what I call two-timing, because your folk might have been, or you might have accessed your own church, but then you thought, what's everyone else doing? I wonder what's happening at so-and-so. And so, you know, before you know it, you're into, oh, that's good. So there's been quite a bit of two-timing. Now, you've got to strip those out, and I don't know, but I'm guessing maybe half of that increase is frequency in two-timing, but the other is clearly new people or returnees or people who used to come only at Christmas who are now there most weeks. And that's an enormous number of new online churchgoers. So, fantastic. That's numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. Number 5, but of course the experience of individual churches has varied enormously. What we've found is that probably 55% of the churches we've surveyed say they think their online congregation is bigger, and 45% it's smaller. It varies enormously. 20-25% of churches have seen their online congregation is more than double. So some churches' congregations have just risen hugely, others have shrunk. So when we emerge from this period, as we're beginning to now, and we're beginning to use our buildings again, we may be finding that that some churches have grown, some have shrunk. That's going to be different. Some churches may die, of course. Others, it's the makings of them. Number 6, the experience has varied with platform. So if you've been using Zoom, on average, your Zoom attendance is 20-25% smaller than it was in person before lockdown. And that's, of course, because Zoom is a private invitation-only platform. So most of your Zoom congregation were your previous congregation, and not everyone manages to get on Zoom. So on average, you're down a bit. It's a good way of doing it, but that's the snag with it. Some churches have been finding word of mouth and invitation around the village or the community has begun to bring new people in, but that's what people have said to us about Zoom. If you're using Facebook or YouTube or something similar, on average, the congregation is 40-50% bigger than it was before. If you're using multi-platform, you're on, say, all 3 of those, for instance, then on average, you've doubled your congregation. So if you're looking to reach more people, multi-platform is the way to go. You get out there with as wide a footprint as you can. Number 7, just over 1 in 3 churches told me that their online congregation is growing steadily week by week through lockdown. 1 in 6 said it was shrinking, and the others about the same. So there was a massive surge at the beginning, and then on average, just a slight increase as the months have gone by. Now, I do suspect that as we're beginning to unlock now, numbers accessing online services may dip a little, I don't know. But that's just a suspicion. And finally, number 8, the trends in the small churches are at least as good, perhaps better, than the trends in the big churches. By and large, people are not looking for big, glossy, professional outfits. So, you know, you sit back and it's as good as BBC Songs of Praise. Our church, by the way, featured on BBC Songs of Praise yesterday. If you saw it from Eam in Derbyshire. What really matters to most people, I think, is local and authentic, and people they might, you know, meet around in the local community. I think it's something that's tailor-made for our parish system. So that's stuff we found out from the survey. Just a word. Many of you will be all over this, but just a word about making contact with new online worshippers and beginning to welcome them into the community of the church. We make them feel welcome, when we're live streaming and putting together services, whatever you do. But of course, it is possible to find out who they are and get to know them, many of them. During the process, our church uses Facebook, so we encourage everyone to sign in with a comment, and most of them do. So, if we've got 50 devices, we probably on average know who 45 of them are. Some of them will press a like button or something, and so we can find out, we can then press on that and we get their Facebook page up and we learn a bit more about them, and then we try and contact them. We put our heads together. Who knows John Johnston? Who's he? And somebody says, oh, he's my brother-in-law. And so we're away. The family service that I lead, we've picked up probably 6 or 8 new families during online who are there most weeks. And by hook or by crook, I got a mobile phone number for each of them. So we're in touch with them. And the plan in August is to invite each of the new families in turn round to our back garden to say hello. And how nice to see you. What have you thought of online, and what do you want to do in the future? We've also, by the way, as some of you will have done, I'm sure, advertised on the Facebook page and on the website and in the notices on the online services, an online alpha course. We were lucky to get 2 or 3 for a beginner's course, an alpha course in a year. Before lockdown, we've got 16 doing the online alpha course. My wife helps run it, so she'll be here on Tuesday evening with 16 onliners, most of whom have found the church online or been very new to us. So that's working okay. Will all these people disappear when we go back in the building? Well, if we stop going online, if we go offline and just go back to the way we were, we will go back to the way we were. And most of those people will disappear from our church lives. But I don't think they'll disappear if we stay online. So we want to meet them and welcome them and get to know them and begin to help them to integrate into church life through every stage of the freezing of locking down, and then the gradual unfreezing as we gradually unlock at the moment. So making contact and befriending and welcoming the new people just seems to me to be a core business at the moment. And then the other part of core business, in my head anyway, is reimagining what church should be like for when the corona business is all over. And we're not back to normal, but we're at what everyone calls a new normal. Why should we be doing this? What's the point? Well, 4 things. Number 1, the world will be very, very different in the future in all sorts of ways. Transition period and then some permanent changes. Lots of people will be working from home, living online. Unemployment and poverty are probably going to be greater. And the way people think is going to be a bit different as well. They'll still be unsettled for years to come. Number 2, the church we all knew will be different. Existing church members will have changed through the experience. Some people might have left us for all sorts of reasons. Other new people will have joined us. Maybe finances have been hit. In the short term anyway, can we afford to pay all the clergy anymore? It may accelerate the shift to focal minister leadership models that I was promoting before I retired. We don't know, but the church is going to be different. And if we can succeed in keeping a lot of the new people who've joined us online, then the church will be bigger and the church's financial problems will be solved by the growth of the church. So there's a short-term financial hit, there should be a long-term enormous financial gain, incidentally. And then most of us realise we can't abandon online now we've found it. So there will be a permanent whole new dimension to church life that's going to change us in all sorts of ways. Church services and all sorts of other ways as well. Our own rector, by the way, in the first weeks of online, his mum has got too frail to go to her own church. So she's joined our church. And so has his sister, who didn't go to church at all. So how is he going to say to them, you know, his mum and his sister, oh, we're back in the building now, so we're not going to bother with you anymore. Bye. And of course he's not. We're online forever. And I think most churches will see it the same way. And finally, there's a wonderful once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Most churches I know are more frantic than focused. The hardest thing in church life is to stop doing stuff, even if it's outlived its time. We can add new stuff, but taking old stuff away is trickier. The government stopped it all for us. So don't unthinkingly simply restart church as it was in every aspect. Think it through. What do you want to restart as was? What do you want to let go of? What do you want to do in a new way? So there's time to reimagine church life for the future. Don't give up this once-in-a-lifetime golden opportunity to do so. So that's why I think, you know, we really need to rethink church for when we're back in the buildings permanently. How do you do that? The content of it is between you and God. Each church has got to pray and talk and seek guidance and work it out with God. But here's a structure which I think is helpful. Every church should be thinking, how do we have wider doors? Because this great discovery is suddenly we've been forced to open wide our doors by opening up this giant portal from church to the living rooms of the nation. And suddenly, you know, people are coming to and fro between the two. People have responded. And so it's just incredibly important to keep those doors open and to open them as wide as possible in every aspect of church life. That's, you know, the physical doors in the building. How can we make it easier for people to relate with us and come and worship God with us? How can we welcome them better, make it easier, wider doors? But there's no point in just having wider doors if you don't meet the needs of the people. And those needs have deepened because the times are more serious. People, I think, have got a new spiritual thirst. Many of them have anyway. And they're addressing hard new questions. Some old spiritualities are living again. You know, the big increase in numbers accessing the daily office and Compline. Don't know whether that's been so where you are, but huge numbers of Anglicans have told me that's been the biggest growth in all. You know, there used to be 3 of us gather in the building for morning prayer, and now I live stream it and there's 40. And there's 28 doing Compline. So what do we do with that? And, you know, what does that tell us, and how do we develop it? How can we offer deeper spiritual wells for the newly thirsty to drink from? People are asking for healing from quite deep hurts, heartaches, wanting to answer deep questions, find God in the midst of vast new uncertainties. And this is a global thing, it's everywhere. And the church that will thrive is the church that can offer, therefore, both these two things, the wide open doors and the deep wells. If we can offer them both together, I think that people will flock to us through the online portal. To enable those, we certainly may need wiser programs that I just mentioned. You know, running the whole church program past the wider doors, deeper wells test is a good idea, rather than unthinkingly restoring everything. And don't guess what the people, either the new people or the existing people, want or looking forward to or will do in the future, because the past is no guide. This is uncharted territory. We need to ask. So in Everybody Welcome to the Future, there's a couple of sample questionnaires you can adapt and use for your own congregations. or you can just phone people around or talk to them when you see them, ask them the same questions, and build up some data on what the people in your church and are beginning to access your services, how they see things, how they see things can be improved, what they want to retain in the future, etc., etc. Wiser programs, and that's a way of doing it. And you need smarter structures very often. We need to adjust leadership and organisational structures to support the church of the future, rather than simply limping along with the supports we had for the church of the past. For example, the day of the tech-savvy church leader has arrived. If you've got tech-savvy people, they need to be in at the centre of what you do. They're not just on the periphery anymore. They're at the core of your mission and your life. And then the final thing I'll just have a little go at is, so there was just a little bit of what I've distilled about good practice during lockdown, and then how we're beginning to, how we're thinking about the long-term future. But just a bit about the content of the long-term future, in the sense that most of us, I think, or many of us, have realised that the future has got to be in some form a blend, a hybrid, an integration of online and in-person church. So what sort of vision can we have for that? How could that work best? And we'll come up with a range of solutions, and that's great, because we can try it out in this new world and see what works well and what needs adjusting. But let me give you one vision. It may not work for many of us so well to have one or more services in the building and then separately to do an online service in the way we've been doing the last 3 months that we've just learned how to do. Partly because of the amount of time and effort doing both of those together will take up, and partly because we've then got two quite separate church congregations, which may work. I'm not saying it shouldn't be attempted, but we're not attempting to integrate the onliners with the in-person people very much at all, if we do it like that. I think many of us will be looking to live stream an existing service. We may not need to live stream every service in every little church of a benefice of 12 churches, but live streaming something, 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever, is surely going to be part of the deal for many of us. That's more efficient in the use of time because it's all happening together. But how does it work? There's all sorts of questions and issues around that. We can bounce around later on if you like. It's okay if all you do is put up a camera and the camera follows the vicar at the front and people can look at that if they want. I don't think that's terribly good, but it's a start. I think we'll be much more looking to integrate 2 communities rather than have one community watched by a few individuals, from the privacy of their own homes. And maybe the key to that is to have someone designated as an online pastor who sat at, maybe even at a laptop like I'm at the moment, and you're live streaming through, say, for example, Facebook. So as people come in, just before the service begins, they can say hello, hello, Linda's here. And the online pastor say, oh, nice to see you, Linda, how are your bunions this week? So you begin to have personal contact between the online pastor and the online church members, and that can spill over to the rest of the week as well. If you find out where they live, somebody visits them, somebody invites them to a church event, a coffee morning or a home group, and they can mix online and in person depending on who they are. So maybe you do other stuff online, as well as the church service. So they're doing that, and maybe somebody online can lead the intercessions, or read the lesson, and that comes up on the screen at the front of church. Maybe even an onliner can preach the sermon. I came across in another webinar yesterday, somebody who's developed a link with an Anglican priest in Nigeria, and they're sharing each other's services, and he's wanting to get the Nigerian Anglican licensed to his parish, so that he can preach regularly. One can preach for Nigeria, the Nigerian can preach for England. All sorts of stuff like that. So you're integrating two sets of people. And at the end of the service, got some refreshments. You can go to Zoom coffee. So the onliners are on screens, and there's a screen showing the room where the coffee is. So you can have chat between the two congregations. So you begin to feel part of the same outfit and community. Now, who are these people who are going to be accessing online when the building is available? I'll just quickly list what I think there may be 5 categories. You may think of others. I've thought of 5 so far. They are, number 1, the housebound, the frail, the shielding, the care homes, anyone for whatever reason who can't get physically to the building. And that's just the most obvious category of folk. It's our rector's mum, and maybe the care homes in the area can just routinely be plugging in at 10:30 on a Sunday morning to the local parish church, and there it is for anyone who wants to take part. Number 2, those are the congregation who aren't available that Sunday at that time. They're working, they're busy, they're on holiday, they've got visitors, they're poorly. Before online church, that was it for the week. That's part of the reason why average attendance at church has gone down to probably little more than 1 week in 2 for the average churchgoer. With online church and the video of it up on the website for the following week, that proportion can go back up, perhaps even up towards what it was in the 1950s, as people catch up later on. Also, by the way, if you didn't quite, if you fell asleep in the sermon in the building on Sunday morning, and then you wake up with a conscience about it on Tuesday, you can check out the sermon again over coffee on Tuesday and really get hold of it then. All sorts of stuff. Number 3, those trying out the church who might one day turn up in person. And we have found a few churches that were online and in person before lockdown, during last year. And what they've told us is that they were getting a steady trickle of people coming into the building for the live service, who have spent the last few weeks or months accessing it online. And what's been happening by and large, in summary, is that they've been getting more and more used to this and interested in it. Not so much the interest, it's being less nervous about turning up in person, because that's what puts so many people off. It's a pretty big and terrifying experience to break into a church building for the first time to access a service. So far from being an alternative to in-person worship, these churches have found it's the way into it. It's their source of growth of the in-person congregation. Just showing people what we're like, and then thinking, oh, I might go along to that, and they turn up, and then they're in. And number 4, there's a set of people for whom online is their natural existence. So it will feel normal and natural to them to access church online as so many other aspects of their lives, particularly currently the 18 to 35-year-old age group. And it's that age group that population surveys suggest have been the most responsive to online church. That's where the biggest growth has been, with younger adults. And surely found a way of communicating with, reaching and talking to younger adults, we're not going to throw that away just because we're back in the building. And finally, there's friends, contacts around the country and around the world who will never turn up in person because they live too far away, but they may be with us some weeks with our online service because it's just great. And we've had people in our village from all over the world join us from time to time. So there's 5 categories of people. Who are the people who are accessing your services online at the moment? Ask them how they want to continue under the new normal and set up accordingly, and be aware of the categories of people who are accessing you, so that you frame the service to suit the congregation that you have. Yes, I think I'll draw this bit to a close in a moment. I think I just see through a glass darkly quite a bit of, some parts of this future, exciting future that's opening up for us. And I may have got some of it wrong, and we'll find out. It's very exciting next few years in the history of the Christian church around the world. But it's an opportunity, and it's up to us not to miss the opportunity. It's too easy to miss. We just can't have the mindset that it will be nice to get back to normal. Because if our aim is to get back to normal, we will go back to probably 80% of what used to be normal. We've got to have a mindset of going forward to what God's got for us in the future. And I think it's possibly the most exciting moment in the history of the church that I've lived through over the last 50 or 60 years. But it's an opportunity to be grasped. And it doesn't need to be threatening, because as I said before, there's also the opportunity to slim down what we've done in the past. We don't need to be overwhelmed by this. But together as churches, thinking and praying it through, we can come to a different way of working that isn't more exhausting or demanding, but it's just different. And we'll find it's more productive. We'll be in touch with more people, and we'll reach new depths, and the church will grow in each dimension of its life. That's the vision and the excitement for the future. So I'll stop there and over to Chris, and let's do some questions.
Okay, thanks, Bob, for that. Very much appreciated. And there's just looking at some of the questions coming in, and there's one that I'm sure will be very common to many people. A lot of people that will be watching are from small rural communities, particularly in central, mid, West Wales, North Wales too. Internet connections not always great there, and the demographic of the population, particularly churchgoers, will be perhaps quite elderly. So even though you say, not to feel threatened by this, I can imagine if I were a vicar in some fairly remote part of Wales with a very elderly congregation with an internet that kept dropping off all the time, I would feel quite, I find it difficult to relate perhaps to what you're saying. So yes. What do you say to people in that position?
Well, first of all, I mean, we live in a village. The internet connectivity in the church was hopeless. So we've just had that last week put right. So we've now got good broadband speed in the church building for the first time. It's cost a bit of money. It'll be well worth it. Secondly, if you're looking at a set of churches in a group or a multi-church benefice or whatever it is, just look at doing this with one church building. You don't need to do it with everyone. And my advice might seem a bit left field, but my advice would be to focus on the building that has the most welcoming congregation, because it's likely to be that building that people accessing online will trickle into. So that's one set of things, because obviously, by definition, the new people you will reach will be people who are able to access online. They may well be younger and a different sort of person from who's been in the church building in the past. That's called evangelism. We've got a wonderful opportunity, but we don't abandon the faithful folk, of my age group now and above. And there's all sorts of ways of including them. As we've been finding out through lockdown, I think there's been quite a big increase in the numbers who are using the sermon phone processors we've now got. Is it? It's called YPay, is it? There's a couple of them. You can, whereby you'll know this better than me, you phone a certain number and you get a little package that's been put together by the vicar or somebody. They can hear the sermon, a couple of church notices, they can take part in liturgy, you can hear each other all at the same time, and you don't need a laptop or anything like that. Other churches are gathering together second-hand laptops or phones or whatever people have got kicking around the houses, reconditioning them if necessary, and are beginning to take them out to some of their older folk to teach them how to use them. And I think that's well worth doing in many places. Or if the person is unteachable, well, treat that as an opportunity, not a problem. Call next door. Find a friend or next door neighbour and say, could you give Mrs. Jones a hand on a Sunday morning and press the right buttons for her? And maybe the neighbour will then sit with Mrs. Jones and access the service themselves. Because a lot of people, it's going to be a long time before they're back in the building, if only because they're afraid of assembling in close quarters with other people. So yes, there's always going to be a few people left out. There's always going to be a few black spots with the net, which are hopefully being closed all the time. But mostly there's ways round, and there's ways of turning the problems into opportunities. Sorry, long answer.
No, that's great. Thank you. That was a really interesting question that's come up from Patrick here that might be going through some of our minds. And he says, does online church run the risk of enabling half-hearted Christians, kind of an easy avoidance of discipleship, that you just kind of perhaps have the monitor on in the background as you're cooking Sunday lunch and
yes,
as it goes? Is there a risk of that?
Yeah, well, of course there is. There's a risk of that in everything we do. I mean, you can pose the same problem to a congregation in a church building. I mean, if you're preaching, you can get a sense of, how well people are listening, and a lot of the time it's not very well. These days I have to, because obviously I haven't been a vicar for a while, I have to sit through other people's sermons, and I confess I very often glaze over. So frankly, this is a problem with every style of doing and being church, and it will vary between individuals. I'm of the age group that began very sceptical, really, of the ability of accessing church online to be fully, church. I've had to change my mind. For example, last Sunday morning, my church's early church, 9 o'clock for families, the one I look after, I wasn't leading this particular one. We had a 4-year-old grandson with us. And the 4-year-old, I sat him on my knee in front of the screen, and there are activities to do. He was totally immersed in that worship service of 40 minutes. Absolutely, totally. He took in every word. He did the activities. He laughed at the jokes. The rector at one point was on a rock in the hills near us, saying he comes here to pray. Yesterday, I had to take the 4-year-old to that rock. So for him, that was a much more immersive experience of worship than being in the building where he just run around and play. I've had to learn.
Okay. You mentioned a question I was going to ask, actually, which I'm going to lead on to another question somebody else has posed. You mentioned about 18 to 35-year-olds as being most responsive,
yes,
in terms of uptake, but also mentioned that a lot of very traditional services like morning prayer, evening prayer, compline,
Yes.
I've also been picking people up there. So you wouldn't normally associate an 18 to 35-year-old with those traditional offices. So is there much sort of crossover?
Good question. I don't know the answer to that one. My suspicion is not a lot. I think what I've picked up from clergy who've told me about it is that it's more the middle-aged and elderly who are finding the 10 minutes a day is right for them. But I'm open to being persuaded otherwise. I think, by the way, that something that we've learnt through the lockdown is that for some people, their church spirituality may be better served by, if you draw this analogy, by eating a 10-minute meal once a day than having a 70-minute feast once a week. So is that a different way of doing church? Forget the big service on a Sunday morning. Somebody doing compline or morning prayer for 10 minutes a day, every day, is not going to church any less online than doing the 70 minutes a day. So that may be something. The 18 to 34-year-olds, I think a little bit less likely to go local and a little bit more likely to go where there are people like them, which of course we all do anyway, but there are fewer churches with people like them. And certainly I've heard of some massive increases in online attendance at some of our town centre churches that are specifically geared at 18 to 35-year-olds. What happens when they can associate in person, we'll wait and see. I think there's two forces at work. This is the generation that naturally lives online. While we speak, by the way, up in another study at the top of our house is our son who's visiting us. He was 33. He works for BP and he's been working from home now for months. So they come to visit us. He's working. So he's trying to organise gas exploration in Mauritania from our house. That's the world he now lives in. And he said to me the other night, you know what, with people like me doing this on the screen all day, every day, church could become our counterculture, because it'll be our one time left to find community and meeting real people. He used to have a community at work. That's now gone. It's only online. And he wants to meet people. He goes to church anyway, but he thinks some of his generation might go to church because they can go to a building and meet real people, because they're starved of it in the new way of living. So there are all sorts of ways it could go. And let's see how it unfolds.
Yeah, some really interesting questions coming in that require a little bit of thought at the moment. So thank you for those. Really one from Sue here, who says, I'm running twice weekly telephone prayer meetings via YPay, which you mentioned earlier.
Yep.
She said the morning prayer works really well with around 15 attending, which is about 5 times more than in a physical service. I think most of us to that. Now, interesting one. Do you have any suggestions for making it more exciting, Sue says, and encouraging people to come along in the evening? I kind of quite like, if we're able to, Veronica, and Sue's happy, Sue to just explain what she means by make it a little more exciting there. So maybe if
yes, please,
to answer that, but Sue, if you just want to message Veronica and say if you're happy to ask that question live.
Yes, it seems to me she'll know more about this than I do. I haven't done a telephone thing. I just wonder with the word exciting whether she's just got a little something at the back of her head that might help the rest of us. Hello, Sue.
Hi. Yeah, what I'm basically doing, I'm an ordinand at the moment, and my priest is a technophobe. So I'm basically running these services, and I'm just doing it from the service sheet, and we have the readings, and I do the lot, and it's good. Everybody enjoys it, but it feels like it could be a bit more interesting.
Yes.
I wonder if we need a homily or something. I'm not sure how long these things will grab people's attention for?
Yes, well, I mean, clearly there's an attention span problem. Watching a large screen online, I think the consensus is 45 minutes is enough. So, you know, if your church service lasts for 75, there's a bit of an issue there. On a phone, if you're 83, you know, my hunch is that, you know, 15-20 minutes is plenty. I wonder, you know, homily, yes, but I just wonder on the phone, the same as other online services, whether just a bit of personal testimony and story wouldn't come over very powerfully. On the phone, you see, everyone can hear everyone else, as I understand it.
Yeah.
So if you've got, can you find one of your phone people who's got some testimony of how God has been good to them during the lockdown, and ask them just to say it for 2 or 3 minutes as part of the online event. And I would guess that that will be incredibly powerful for the other people who listen to it.
What I find as well is that because everybody can hear and everybody can speak,
yeah,
it's quite exciting when we do the responses.
Yes.
Sounds like the aftermath of the Tower of Babel.
Yeah. And they'll talk in different speeds, presumably in 2 different languages.
Yeah.
Yeah, terrific.
Oh, that's a lovely idea, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sue.
Thank you, Sue. Keep working at it.
I will.
Yeah, and when you've got a bit of experience, share it with everyone else. This is a period when we need to learn from each other. We shouldn't all be reinventing the same wheel. We've got to learn from each other. This is why we're doing the webinar.
Thank you.
Just to follow that up, Sue, on if you're available on Tuesday for the webinar on Tuesday afternoon, we've got Aaron Aurora, who's one of the participants for the webinar on Tuesday, and he's done great things with the occasional offices, traditional offices in St. Nick's in Durham. They've seen an awful lot of growth through morning prayer, evening prayer, and compline. So if you're around Tuesday, might be worth having a listen to what Aaron's got to say as well. As good Anglicans, a really great question from Alan Griffiths here, who says, I'm a member of Church in Wales. The vast majority of our services are Eucharistic based, and that poses its own challenges, I guess, to online ministry. So, straightforward question, how can Eucharist be shared with those online?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Very short question for you to answer.
Yes. How long have we got? Now, I have to confess that in the 2 documents we wrote, we deliberately shied away from this hot potato because it's theologically a hot potato and people will disagree. And I didn't want people switching off from what I was saying by disagreeing with what they thought I was saying about communion. And so, you know, there are new deep theological questions. We have always thought that to receive the body and blood of Christ, you need to be there present in the building. The priest has consecrated the bread and the wine, and you handed it and you eat it. So how does that work when you're not physically there? Now, some clergy have encouraged people, if they wish, to have some bread and wine by the side of them in their own lounge. And when the time comes to eat and drink it, as a mirror, as a reflection of taking communion, without suggesting that it is being consecrated. And there are some who say that's dodgy. You shouldn't do that. And I've no idea whether you've had directions in the Church in Wales from the bishops or not. But you see the problems. There's a bit of a theological issue here. Is if you're accessing church online and there you are, you're immersed in the experience, you see it on the screen, and the bread and wine at the altar is being consecrated, and you've got bread and wine with you, why is the Holy Spirit incapable of infusing your bread and wine in the same way as the bread and wine on the altar? So I think we've got a new set of theological questions to grapple with, argue about, and answer. But I'm just beginning to wonder whether we can't go down that route. I don't know. You know, I haven't given it huge thought, to be honest. But the other thing is that there may be some people who, as they see that being so precious as the center point of a service that they're watching, they will be motivated to want to come into the building to share that experience themselves. So it may work like that. For others, it may work. You know, this is a barrier, between them that have got this and me that hasn't. We've got a lot to work through. People like Chris have got to think about it in the theological colleges. Yeah,
I feel a bit guilty giving you that question, Bob, to be honest. I thought we got you. But I mean, it's one of the real questions that we're all asking ourselves at the moment.
Yes.
What does this mean for us as church? What does it mean for us as a Eucharistic community?
Yes.
Interesting question from Ben here as well. And he says, do you think there's a danger that we will just do the same things we've always done, but broadcast them on Facebook, etc.? And I know one of the things that we're a little worried about is that the enormous amount of creativity that we've seen in recent weeks and months will kind of be lost, that people will just see the benefit of putting stuff online, but it will just be a reproduction of what we always do when we're gathered, rather than looking at a whole theology around digital ministry. So how do you answer that?
Oh, absolutely. That really is a danger, and we've got to avoid it. I think we've learned a lot online. I mean, the creativity is one thing. For instance, the families service, which I began as a message church, and it's expanded out of that. When we used to meet, a group of oldies, in the 60s, led by me, did the leading of it all and the creativity, and the families came along and accessed it. Now we're online. The families are doing a lot of the creativity. They're creating videos which we're putting on the website so other families can do the activities, copying them. So they're beginning to own it and lead it themselves. There's no way we want to go back to just the way we were. We want to, use and develop the ministry and creativity of these new Christian families in our new world. Other things we've learnt, online, it just shows up some of the issues we had with the services in the buildings. I mean, in our church, it wouldn't be unusual for there to be 7, 8, 10 minutes of notices. Now, you really don't want to be watching that online. And then, do we all have the person who, when the reading is announced, suddenly realizes after a few seconds, oh, that's me? And they're sat on the back pew and they pick up a Bible and they meander to the front. And by the time they found it and said, that the reading is, 45 seconds have gone by. So we may realize that we need to tighten up what we do in the building because we want to present well online. And that will improve what we do in the building. Similarly with sermons. I mean, I did a sermon for last Sunday. I recorded it, and I thought I've got to keep it down to 10 to 12 minutes because that's all people will take online. And so I prepared a tighter text, and I didn't go off on rambling asides. And in some ways, it was probably better. So what have I learned? Will I go back to rambling along for 25 minutes when I get back in the building? I hope not. So I'm hoping that online will make us smarten up our act when we're in the buildings.
Okay, thank you for that. Martin's made an interesting point about, we were talking about the difference in just putting a service, recording a service and putting it out there, and the hope that we'll kind of keep those people that started coming into church for the first time. What he says is, could you comment on the balance between input and interaction in a Zoom conference in a local setting? And I think, if I'm reading between the lines, What we're talking about there is community there, that maybe digital ministry putting online what we're recording in a building. But how do you foster that real sense of community, particularly at the moment where it's online only?
Yes.
Tips about that.
Yes. Well, I think the Zoom churches have got a much better platform for community, particularly if it's a small church and you can see everybody's face on the screen all at once. I led a Zoom service the week last Sunday for a neighbouring village. Pretty well every face was on the screen. There were 30 odd people altogether. And I felt a really good sense of community. When I'd done the service, we went into Zoom coffee groups, so there were 4 or 5 with me, and I got to know them. Worked very well. If you got 100, well, how many we got on today, I can't see everyone's faces, so it's more input than community. I think that the community has got to be worked at hard, partly through the online pastor and partly through the online and in-person people mixing with each other during the week and calling at each other's homes and getting to know each other, so that it's not a collection of strangers looking at a stranger's worship event. That seems to me key. If there's no community, we haven't got church. So we have to work at community, and in a sense that I still think, I'm old enough to still think that has to involve physically meeting people at some stage.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if you like The Simpsons, Bob, but I can remember seeing an episode of The Simpsons which was kind of world end stuff, apocalyptic stuff, and everybody in church made a dash for the pub, and everybody in the pub made a dash. And it just strikes me, folks I meet regularly sort of for an online quiz, as we all do at the moment. We're all desperate to meet up, and yet there are these people who will walk past church on a Sunday, the building, but have hooked into church online. So somewhere we have to find that balance, don't we, about making everybody feel part of that same community. Absolutely,
and everybody will have different attitudes. This is why I'm saying, ask people. And don't assume. Learn from people, and we try to accommodate everyone, be inclusive.
Good question from Pam. You mentioned focal ministers as part of your presentation, and Pam said we've been discussing clergy-led services a fair bit.
Yes.
But do you see a real opportunity to affirm and enhance lay ministry online?
Oh yes. I mean, I think you can see why in many churches it's suddenly just the vicar, from the vicarage study, and in a way that's regressing to the old days, and then as some of us began to get a handle on the technology, with stuff like OBS, we began to incorporate other people's contributions to the service. By now in our village, there's quite a rich mix, and we've cut the rector out quite a lot, frankly. So we've got a little group of people now who've mastered the tech and can lead and coordinate services, and they press a button and so does the reading, and somebody else has got a video of the theme and so on. So it's become a community way of doing things. And of course, the tech people have come into their own, because they're enabling it to happen. But the idea that people are after what's going on locally, and for many that means in my village, not the next door village. We've got that where we are. People in our village have no interest in the church service coming from the next door village at all, as far as I can see. They're interested in my village, and so I see a great future for smaller churches, each being led by a part-time unpaid focal minister, and doing their own thing in their own locality that would be accessed by their own people. The Methodists made a big mistake, I think, at the beginning by saying, we'll only do 2 or 3 online services for the whole country and every Methodist can log into them. Methodists weren't interested in that. Methodists in droves found a local service that the Anglicans were doing, or the Baptists, rather than going to Central Hall, Westminster. So the more local we can get, the more individuals we can get, each doing one community, I think the better.
Talking about churches, obviously there's a mixed picture about churches that have grown and churches that have, on paper at least, shrunk during lockdown. Do you find it's a competitive marketplace, or have you found a lot of collaborative ministry as far as
I don't think it's either. My experience, because I've asked around and talked to a lot of people and seen stuff, I don't think it's either competitive or collaborative. I think by and large each church is set up on its own or each benefice and is doing its own thing. There's a funny sense in which it's still isolationist, even though we're out to the whole world. I think there may be much more scope for instance, neighbouring churches to get your heads together and collaborate together. For example, one church could specialise in a service that's in a church building, but specifically designed to be live streamed to care homes and shut-in elderly people, across a wider area. So you're doing 6 care homes, not 1. Another church down the road might tailor their online offering to folk, to families, say, or to folk who may be just trying out church online for the first time. So you can do that. And then, of course, there may be 3 out of 4 churches that are frankly sinking under the problems of the tech. But in the 4th church, there's someone who really knows what they're talking about. Well, that person should be helping all of the churches to set it up properly and should be able to, to give lessons to the other 3 churches. There are all sorts of ways in which we should be cooperating, using gifts and skills and making sure that what we offer complements what the neighbouring churches are offering.
An awful lot of ministerial colleagues are pretty exhausted, from what I can tell by this point, after 3 or 4 months of almost having to reimagine the way they do church in real time. And the prospects are that churches are beginning again, albeit with maybe look very different to how we imagine they always did. But I was talking to a colleague the other day who was saying, well, I'm looking forward to church opening, but I don't want to let my online stuff go either. But I can't possibly be managing both of those because he said I'm exhausted. So what would you say to somebody like that? Where does the balance lie in that part?
Well, it's a huge issue. At least, I hope all the clergy are getting a good break over August. Our rector's been, lots of other stuff has happened. He's been quite exhausted. He's on holiday and the rest of us are looking after it while he's away, and we hope he'll come back feeling stronger. It's got to be a team effort. Now, when it comes to, say, the tech and the live streaming, not many clergy are the church expert on this. All that the clergy need to do, frankly, is to say, this is what I believe we want, we need. I don't know how to do it, but Fred and Mabel, you know better than the rest of us how to do this. Can you just get on with it and do it? We've got to give real responsibility to people to do areas of the job. and Alice, you know, you're great with people. Could you be the online pastor and compile a list of, you know, who's accessing online and begin to get to know them, etc. It's got to be a team effort. And it started out in lockdown as though, you know, I Eve Naomi am left and all that learning to do, we're exhausted. The way out of it is every member ministry. We've all known we should do every member ministry, but now we absolutely have to. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe just one or two questions, because I think we've probably exhausted you this afternoon, Bob, for throwing all these questions at you as well.
Great.
Just thinking.
Is there anyone still there, by the way, Chris? You know, have they all left us, or they're still there?
No. People are still there.
All right. Well done, everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, thank you for that. Just a throwaway question, really, and just narrowing it down to the Anglican Church. Are we likely to see a different Anglican Church, Church in Wales, Church of England emerge from this? Are our priorities going to be different? Are we going to be training people differently? Are we going to exercise our ministry differently?
We should, and it should be very different. I mean, where do I start on the training? Yes, you're going to have to redo your curriculum, Chris. Yeah, of course church will be different. Just being online as well as in person makes it very different. If things go well, we'll be very different because we'll have grown younger. There'll be a lot of younger people in the church in Wales. Think on that. And we'll be doing not only church services differently, but ministry and outreach will be different as well. This is an opportunity to step back from the brink of near extinction, which is where the Church in Wales has been heading with its ever encroaching reduction in attendance. This is an opportunity to be growing and flourishing with new generations in new ways. This is the key moment. And together we can do it because God's given us the opportunity. This is absolutely the critical moment to be different.
That's great. Thank you, Bob. And on that very positive note, we said we'd draw a line at 3:15, so we need to honour that. And I think you probably need a good cup of coffee by now with some extra caffeine.
Lucozade, Chris, Lucozade.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll get on to that for you, Bob, no problem at all. But just on behalf of everybody, just to thank you for your time this afternoon and for your insight as well. I referenced those two reports, Everybody Welcome Online, Everybody Welcome to the Future. So they are available, and we can, with your permission, Bob, we can point links to those.
Oh yes, please. Yes. They're on websites. Yeah.
So what we'll do is, again, on the St. Padarn's website, if we've got the resources page, we'll have a direct link to that. It might even be before we finish, Veronica or Jen have an opportunity to just pop that up in the chat there. And there we go. See, no sooner said than done. Just to remind everybody, we've got our next webinar on Friday morning at 11 o'clock. Peter Phillips from Durham will be facilitating that. And again, I don't know Peter particularly well, but the conversations I've had, he's very happy to chew theology. Come along with some awkward questions for Peter.
He runs the Centre for Digital Theology.
Yes. So
what's that?
Sounds very exciting, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
But one not to miss on a Friday, I would
Absolutely.
have thought. And then, as I said, if you go to St. Padarn's site, and you'll see the other 7 webinars in the series of 8 there. But for this afternoon, just to thank everyone for their attendance, to thank Bob very much once again for your input, Veronica and Jen for keeping us all on track. And thank you very much. Hope to see you all soon.
Great. Thanks. God bless everyone. Bye.